The morning rush filled the corporate office with the usual blend of hurried footsteps, ringing phones, and coffee-fueled conversations. In the heart of it all, unnoticed by nearly everyone, was Thomas Grayson, the janitor. He moved quietly through the halls, pushing his cart, emptying trash bins, and wiping down surfaces without a second thought from the employees around him. To them, he was invisible. Just another background worker, someone whose presence was expected but never acknowledged. But today was different. As Thomas wiped down the conference room table, a group of executives walked in, chatting loudly. One of them, Mark, a senior manager with an ego the size of the building, stopped mid-sentence and wrinkled his nose. "Ugh, the janitor's still here," Mark scoffed, waving his hand as if to clear the air. "Shouldn't you be doing this when we're not around? Nobody wants to watch you clean, man." The others chuckled. One of the women in the group, Lisa, smirked and leaned against the doorway. "Honestly, don't you have better things to do than eavesdrop on executive meetings? Not that you'd understand any of it." Thomas clenched his jaw but stayed silent. Years of experience had taught him to pick his battles. He simply nodded, grabbed his cart, and rolled it out of the room without a word. But as he walked away, he caught one last comment. "Bet he barely finished high school," Mark muttered under his breath. "Probably thinks mopping floors is a career." Laughter echoed behind him. Thomas sighed as he walked toward the janitor's closet. It wasn't the first time they'd humiliated him. But little did they know they were laughing at the wrong man, because Thomas Grayson wasn't just a janitor. He owned the company. 15 years ago, Thomas had built Grayson Industries from the ground up. After decades of hard work, he'd stepped down as CEO and taken a more subtle approach to managing his empire. Disguised as a janitor, he wanted to see how employees treated the so-called low-level staff when they thought no one was watching, and what he saw disgusted him. Mark and his little clique weren't just arrogant, they were toxic. They belittled interns, manipulated subordinates, and took credit for others' work. But today would be the last day they got away with it. Thomas made his way to the executive office, where his longtime assistant, Eleanor, was waiting for him. Unlike the others, she knew his true identity. "Everything set?" he asked. Eleanor nodded. "Yes, sir. The board has been informed. They're ready when you are." Thomas smirked. "Good. Let's go fire some people." He walked back into the conference room, this time with purpose. The executives were still laughing over their coffee, oblivious to what was coming. "Excuse me," Thomas said, his voice firm. Mark turned, irritation flashing across his face. "Oh, great, he's back. What, did you miss a trash can?" The room snickered. But then Thomas pulled something out of his pocket, a sleek black ID badge. He tossed it onto the table. It landed face up, displaying his name and title. Thomas Grayson, founder and owner. The room fell silent. Mark's smirk vanished. Lisa's face drained of color. The others exchanged nervous glances. Thomas crossed his arms. "It's funny, isn't it? How quickly people reveal who they really are when they think no one important is watching." Mark swallowed hard. "Sir, Save it," Thomas cut him off. "I've seen enough. The way you treat people, the way you humiliate those you think are beneath you is disgraceful. And I don't tolerate disgrace in my company." Lisa opened her mouth to protest, but Thomas held up a hand. "You're all fired," he said, his voice calm but firm, effective immediately. A stunned silence filled the room. Then chaos erupted. "You can't be serious. Wait, Mr. Grayson, please. This is a joke, right?" Thomas simply turned to Eleanor. "Security will escort them out." As the guards arrived, Mark and the others pleaded. But it was no use. They were done. And as Thomas watched them leave, he felt no regret. because today the janitor had the last laugh. Word of the firings spread like wildfire through the company. By lunchtime, employees whispered in the hallways, trying to make sense of what had happened. Some were stunned, others quietly relieved. The toxic executives who had ruled with arrogance and belittled anyone they deemed less than were gone. Just like that. But for Thomas Grayson, the work was far from over. Sitting in his office, a space he rarely used, he watched the security footage from the past few months. Eleanor had compiled clips of Mark, Lisa, and their inner circle mistreating employees, making sarcastic remarks at the interns, rolling their eyes during meetings, and taking credit for others' ideas. It disgusted him. He had built this company to be a place where hard work and respect mattered, not where egos thrived at the expense of good people. How did this happen? Thomas muttered, shaking his head. How did we let people like this rise so high? Eleanor, who had worked by his side for years, sat across from him, arms folded. They knew how to play the game. They sucked up to the right people, blamed their mistakes on others, and climbed the ladder by stepping on those below them. Thomas exhaled sharply. Not anymore. He leaned forward, drumming his fingers on the desk. I need a full assessment of every department. I want to know who's really making this company run and who's just coasting on someone else's effort. Eleanor nodded. Already ahead of you. I've spoken to department heads who were afraid to speak up before. There's a lot of dead weight in upper management. Then it's time to clean house. Eleanor gave him a small smile. That's fitting, considering how you started this whole thing. Thomas chuckled. A janitor's job is to keep things clean. I guess I'm just doing my job. He stood and walked over to the window, looking down at the city below. This company was his legacy. It had started with nothing but an idea and sheer determination. He refused to let it become a playground for corporate bullies. Just then, there was a knock at the door. Eleanor opened it, and a nervous-looking young man stepped inside. He was holding a stack of files and looked hesitant, as if he didn't belong in such an important office. You asked for the reports, sir, the young man said, carefully placing the documents on Thomas's desk. Thomas studied him. He recognized the kid, one of the junior analysts, barely a year into the job, one of the people Mark and Lisa had loved to mock. What's your name? Thomas asked. Jason, sir. Jason Lee. Thomas picked up one of the reports and flipped through it. I've seen your work, Jason. It's impressive. Jason's eyes widened. You have... Of course, Thomas said. You're one of the people actually keeping this company running. While others took credit, you did the work. Jason shifted nervously. I just try to do my best, sir. Thomas smiled. And that's exactly why I want people like you to step up. Jason looked confused. Step up? Thomas sat back down. How would you like a promotion? Jason blinked. A promotion? His voice cracked slightly, making Eleanor suppress a chuckle. You've earned it, Thomas said simply. The old leadership let talent go to waste. I'm not making that mistake again. For a moment, Jason was speechless. Then he stood straighter, nodding. I won't let you down, sir. Thomas nodded. Good. Now let's get to work. As Jason left, looking like he had just won the lottery, Eleanor smirked. You're enjoying this, aren't you? Thomas grinned. More than I expected. Because for the first time in a long time, his company was finally heading in the right direction, and it had started with something as simple as picking up a mop and exposing the filth that truly needed to be cleaned. By the next morning, the office had a completely different atmosphere. It was subtle at first. The hushed whispers had stopped, and employees weren't walking on eggshells anymore. There were no arrogant executives barking orders, No dismissive glances when someone from a lower position tried to speak up. Thomas walked the halls, dressed in his usual janitor's uniform, and observed everything. It was incredible how much the absence of a few toxic people could change an entire workplace. As he turned the corner, he overheard a conversation between two junior employees near the break room. "I still can't believe they're gone," one of them whispered. "Mark and Lisa, fired, just like that?" The other nodded. "Yeah, and did you hear how it happened? The janitor," she lowered her voice dramatically, "was the freaking owner of the company." Thomas smirked but kept walking. Let them talk. Let the legend grow. When he reached the main office floor, he spotted Jason at his new desk. The young analyst still looked a little overwhelmed, but he was focused, already working through his new responsibilities. Thomas made a mental note to check in on him later. As he passed by, someone suddenly stepped in front of him, one of the senior executives, Mr. Harris. He had survived the firings, mostly because he had stayed out of the toxic circle, but his face was tight with worry. "Mr. Grayson," Harris said, glancing around before lowering his voice, I just wanted to say, I had no idea what Mark and Lisa were doing. If I had known—" Thomas held up a hand, stopping him. "Let's not pretend you didn't see anything." Harris paled. "You didn't participate," Thomas continued, "but you didn't stop it either." Harris swallowed hard. I just didn't want to get involved. You know how they were. If I had spoken up, I might have been fired myself." Thomas nodded slowly. "I understand." Relief flashed in Harris's eyes. "But you should have spoken up anyway." Harris's shoulders sagged. "You're lucky," Thomas continued. "I'm not firing you." Harris exhaled sharply. "But," Thomas added, leaning in slightly, "I am watching you." Harris stiffened, nodded quickly, and rushed away without another word. Thomas exhaled. He wasn't going to purge the entire company overnight, but he was going to rebuild it the right way. Eleanor walked up beside him. "You're scaring the executives." Thomas smirked. "Good. Let them be scared. Fear means they know they can't get away with it anymore." She chuckled. "So, what's next?" Thomas thought for a moment. "Now, we fix the culture." And with that, he walked forward, not as a janitor, not as an observer, but as the leader this company needed all along. In the weeks that followed, Grayson Industries underwent a transformation. Gone were the power-hungry executives who ruled through intimidation. In their place, fresh talent stepped up, employees who had been overlooked, dismissed, or pushed aside by the toxic leadership. One of them was Jason. At first, the young analyst had struggled with the weight of his promotion, but under Thomas's watchful eye, he quickly found his rhythm. Unlike Mark and Lisa, Jason listened. He valued his team. And most importantly, he worked hard, not to impress anyone, but because he cared. Thomas had been right about him. But not everyone had adjusted so easily. One afternoon, as Thomas was making his usual rounds, still wearing his janitor's uniform, he spotted an old face lingering in the lobby. Mark. His expensive suit was gone, replaced by something more casual, but the bitterness in his eyes hadn't faded. "Still playing janitor, huh?" Mark sneered as Thomas approached. "Guess old habits die hard." Thomas crossed his arms. "What do you want, Mark?" Mark exhaled, shaking his head. "I came to pick up my stuff. Figured I'd stop by and see how things are going without me." He glanced around, lips curling into a smirk. "Looks different." "It is." Mark chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "You think you did something great, don't you? You saved the company or something." Thomas shrugged. "I know I did." Mark scoffed. "You're delusional. You think these people respect you. You humiliated them. You made them afraid. That's not leadership, Grayson." Thomas tilted his head. "No, Mark. You made people afraid. I made them believe that good work actually matters, that people matter. He stepped closer. You had your chance to be a leader. You chose to be a tyrant instead. Mark's jaw clenched, but he forced out a laugh. Well, we'll see how long this new culture lasts. Companies don't run on kindness. Sooner or later, you'll realize that. Thomas just smiled. Then I guess you'll have to watch from the outside. Mark stiffened but said nothing. Instead, he turned and walked out the doors, disappearing into the city. Thomas sighed. He wasn't naive. People like Mark would always exist. But they would never have power in his company again. A few moments later, Eleanor walked up beside him. I saw him leave. I assume he didn't apologize. Thomas chuckled. Not exactly. She smirked. Well, we'll keep proving him wrong, won't we? Thomas looked around at the office, at the employees who now worked without fear, at the fresh energy in the air, at the company he had almost lost. He said, a small smile forming. We will. Months passed, and the changes at Grayson Industries were undeniable. Productivity soared. Employee satisfaction reached record highs, and even clients began noticing the shift. The company that had once been a breeding ground for arrogance and favoritism had transformed into a place of opportunity and fairness. Thomas continued his daily rounds as a janitor, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. He had spent too many years in an office, detached from the very people who kept his company alive. Now, he saw things firsthand. He heard employees' concerns directly, witnessed who was truly putting in the effort, and ensured that no one, not a single person, was treated the way Mark and Lisa had treated others. One afternoon, as he was wiping down a conference table, a voice called out behind him, "Mr. Grayson?" He turned to see Jason standing in the doorway, his expression nervous yet determined. Thomas straightened. "What is it, Jason?" Jason stepped inside, holding a folder. I found something important." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "Go on." Jason placed the folder on the table and opened it. Inside were financial reports, numbers that didn't quite add up. "I was going through old expense records," Jason explained, "and I noticed some irregularities. Large sums of money were being funneled into private accounts. At first, I thought it was just accounting errors, but then I traced the transactions. They all lead back to him." Jason flipped the page, revealing a familiar name, Harris. Thomas's expression darkened. Harris, the executive who had stayed quiet while Mark and Lisa terrorized employees. The man who had claimed he was too afraid to speak up. Turns out, he wasn't just silent. He was stealing. Thomas exhaled sharply. "How much?" Jason swallowed. "Over $5 million in the past 3 years. Eleanor, who had been listening from the doorway, muttered, "Unbelievable." Thomas clenched his jaw. He had given Harris a chance. He had let him stay, thinking maybe he was just a coward, not a criminal. Clearly, he had been wrong. He turned to Eleanor. "Call legal. Call security. Harris is done." Jason hesitated. "Are we doing this right now?" Thomas met his gaze. "We don't wait to clean up messes, Jason. We take care of them the moment we find them." Jason nodded, a look of admiration crossing his face. Minutes later, security stormed into Harris's office. The stunned executive barely had time to protest before he was escorted out in handcuffs. Employees watched in shock as yet another corrupt figure was removed from the building. But this time, they didn't whisper in fear. They nodded in approval. By the end of the day, news of Harris's arrest had spread. Thomas sat in his office, looking out over the city, feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. His company was finally on the right path. The poison was gone. The future was bright. And as long as he was here, no one would ever take advantage of it again. A week after Harris's dramatic arrest, Thomas sat in his office, reviewing reports. The company was stabilizing, but there was still work to do. Cleaning out the toxic leadership had been step one, but now came the real challenge, building a culture that wouldn't allow corruption to creep back in. He wasn't naive. Just because they had removed the worst offenders didn't mean the problems were completely gone. There were still employees afraid to speak up. Still, some who doubted the company had truly changed. And then there were the outsiders. Grayson Industries had made waves in the business world, firing top executives, exposing theft, and promoting talent from within. The story had spread fast. Investors had questions. Competitors were circling, waiting for a sign of weakness. Thomas wasn't about to give them one. As he finished reviewing a proposal, Eleanor walked in, her expression serious. "We have a situation." Thomas looked up. "What now?" She placed a tablet in front of him, showing a news article. "Disgraced executives speak out. Grayson Industries' dangerous new leadership." Thomas's stomach tightened as he scrolled through the article. Mark and Lisa had given an exclusive interview to a business magazine, spinning their own version of events. Thomas Grayson is running this company into the ground. He fired experienced leadership just to play hero. Employees are afraid to speak up because they know the slightest mistake could cost them their job. Lisa had added, "It's a dictatorship now. If you don't agree with Grayson, you're gone." Thomas sighed. It was predictable. Bitter former executives trying to save face, trying to make him the villain. Eleanor folded her arms. "It's gaining traction. Some investors are getting nervous." Thomas exhaled slowly. "Let them talk." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "That's it? No damage control?" Thomas smirked. "Number. Because their words don't match reality. Anyone who actually works here knows the truth." Eleanor studied him for a moment, then nodded. "All right, but the board will still want reassurance. Set up a meeting." A few hours later, the conference room was filled with board members, some skeptical, some loyal. Thomas stood at the head of the table, calm and collected. "I assume you've all seen the article," he began. A few nodded. One of them, a gray-haired man named Mr. Lawson, cleared his throat. "Thomas, you've made bold moves, and I respect that. But investors don't like uncertainty. This media circus isn't helping." Thomas leaned forward. "Then let's give them certainty." He clicked a remote, bringing up slides of company performance metrics. In the past 3 months, employee satisfaction has increased by 42%. Productivity is at an all-time high. Client retention is stronger than ever. And let's not forget, we caught an executive embezzling $5 million. If we had left things the way they were, how much more would have been stolen? The room fell silent. Thomas continued. "Mark and Lisa weren't leaders. They were parasites. They want to paint me as some dictator. Fine. But a real dictator wouldn't let the lowest-level employees have a voice. A real dictator wouldn't listen." He paused, letting his words settle. "I've spent the past months walking these halls, talking to the people who actually make this company run, not just the ones sitting in corner offices, and you know what I've learned." He clicked again, switching the screen to anonymous employee testimonials. "They trust this company now," Thomas said. "For the first time in years, they feel valued. And that's not something Mark and Lisa can erase with an interview." Board members exchanged glances. Mr. Lawson cleared his throat again. "I have to admit, those numbers speak louder than any article." Eleanor smirked from the corner. By the end of the meeting, the board was satisfied. No sudden shifts, no panic, just confidence in Thomas's leadership. As the members filed out, Eleanor walked up to Thomas. "Handled like a pro." Thomas chuckled. "It's easy when the truth is on your side." But as he looked out at his company, he knew the fight wasn't over. The old ways didn't die overnight, and if he truly wanted to secure the future of Grayson Industries, he had to make sure the right people were leading it, and he had just the plan to do it. The following week, Thomas put his plan into motion. It wasn't enough to remove the bad apples. He had to ensure that the right people stayed in positions of power. That meant promoting employees who had the company's best interests at heart, not just those who were good at office politics. So, he made an announcement. A leadership mentorship program, open to all employees, regardless of position, tenure, or background. Anyone with talent and dedication would have the chance to be mentored by senior leaders, including Thomas himself. They'd gain experience, training, and an inside look at what it took to run Grayson Industries. The response was overwhelming. Applications flooded in. Some from employees who had been overlooked for years, others from new hires eager to prove themselves. Thomas reviewed each one personally, looking for the kind of people who deserved to rise. By the end of the selection process, he had chosen 20 employees from different departments: finance, marketing, operations, customer service, and even maintenance. One of them was a janitor. Her name was Maria, a single mother who had worked at the company for 7 years. Unlike most, she had always treated Thomas with respect, even when she thought he was just another cleaning guy. She had a sharp mind for logistics, often making small suggestions that improved workflow without anyone realizing. When Thomas called her into his office to tell her she'd been selected, she nearly cried. "But, sir, I don't have a college degree," Maria said hesitantly. Thomas smiled. "Neither did I when I started." Her eyes widened. "Wait, what?" Thomas chuckled. "College is great, but experience, problem-solving, and character matter more." Maria swallowed hard, nodding. "I won't let you down." "I know you won't," Thomas said. The mentorship program kicked off, and it was an instant success. Employees trained directly under department heads, learning how decisions were made and what it took to lead. And, unlike the previous executives, these leaders weren't chosen because they were the loudest or most manipulative. They were chosen because they earned it, but not everyone was happy. Some of the remaining upper management, those who had survived the initial purge but still clung to old-school corporate politics, saw the program as a threat. One afternoon, Eleanor walked into Thomas's office, closing the door behind her. "We have a problem," she said. Thomas raised an eyebrow. "Let me guess. Some of the old guard don't like the mentorship program?" Eleanor smirked. "You really do see everything, don't you?" Thomas leaned back. "What are they doing?" "They're whispering in investors' ears," she said, "telling them you're replacing experienced executives with underqualified nobodies." Thomas exhaled, shaking his head. Typical. Eleanor sat down. "We could shut it down. That would ease investor concerns." Thomas looked at her, his expression firm. "No." Eleanor smiled slightly. She had expected that answer. "We do the opposite," Thomas said. "We double down. We prove them wrong, and we do it publicly." Eleanor's eyes gleamed. "What are you thinking?" Thomas leaned forward. "A press event. A public showcase. We highlight the mentorship program, introduce the employees involved, and show their progress. We invite investors, the media, hell, even the employees should see it." Eleanor grinned. "I love it." And just like that, the next phase of the transformation began. A few weeks later, the company held a Leadership Innovation Summit, an internal event where mentorship participants presented their ideas, improvements, and insights. Employees got to see their colleagues in action, many for the first time. Maria was one of the speakers. Standing on stage, she explained how she had streamlined supply chain logistics, saving the company thousands of dollars per month, something no executive had ever noticed before. By the end of the event, even the skeptics in the room couldn't deny it. This wasn't just a PR stunt. This was the future of Grayson Industries, and Thomas was making damn sure it stayed that way. A month after the Leadership Innovation Summit, Grayson Industries had become the gold standard for corporate reform. The mentorship program had proven to be more than just a symbolic gesture. It had real results. Productivity was soaring. Employee retention had skyrocketed. And the toxic culture that had once thrived under Mark and Lisa was officially dead. But not everyone was ready to let go of the past. One afternoon, Thomas was reviewing the latest company-wide reports when Eleanor walked in, looking more serious than usual. "We have a problem," she said, placing a stack of documents on his desk. Thomas sighed. "Another one?" She nodded. "This time, it's coming from the inside." Thomas skimmed the papers. His jaw tightened. A handful of old-school executives, those who had barely survived the purge, had been secretly lobbying against the mentorship program. They had been working in the shadows, quietly pushing investors to force Thomas to reverse his changes. And worse, they had been feeding false information to the press, painting Thomas as an impulsive, reckless leader who was gambling with the company's future. Thomas clenched his fists. He had given these people a chance to embrace change. Instead, they had chosen sabotage. He picked up his phone. "Get them in a room," he said. "Now." Within the hour, 5 senior executives sat in the conference room, shifting uncomfortably under Thomas's sharp gaze. Eleanor stood beside him, arms crossed. "I'm going to give you one chance," Thomas began, his voice dangerously calm. "One chance to explain why you thought going behind my back was a good idea." One of them, a man named Mr. Caldwell, cleared his throat. "Thomas, you have to understand, change is difficult. Investors are uneasy. The mentorship program is untested. We were only trying to ensure the company's stability." Thomas leaned forward. "By lying to the media? By undermining your own company?" Silence. Another executive, a woman named Sandra, tried to salvage the situation. "It's not that we don't support the changes, Thomas. It's just, this isn't how things are normally done. You promoted a janitor, for God's sake." Eleanor scoffed. "That janitor just saved the company millions in logistics improvements." Sandra had the nerve to roll her eyes. "That's not the point. The point is, there are certain standards, certain expectations in the corporate world, and investors—" "I don't give a damn what the corporate world expects," Thomas interrupted, his voice ice cold. "I built this company by doing things differently, and I'm not about to let a bunch of dinosaurs drag us back into the past." He folded his hands together, looking each executive in the eye. "You're done here." Caldwell stiffened. "What?" "You heard me," Thomas said. "Effective immediately. You're all fired." Sandra gasped. "You can't be serious." Thomas stood. "Do I look like I'm joking?" Eleanor smiled. "Security will escort you out." One by one, the executives were removed, not just from their positions, but from the company itself. By the end of the day, their offices were empty. And just like that, the final remnants of the old regime were gone. That night, as Thomas stood by his office window, looking out over the city, Eleanor joined him. "You did it," she said softly. "You really did it." Thomas exhaled. "Not yet." She raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" He turned to her, a slow, determined smile forming. "We cleaned up the mess. Now, it's time to build something better." And as the lights of the city twinkled below, Thomas knew one thing for sure. Grayson Industries was just getting started. The janitor had cleaned house. And this time, the future belonged to the people who truly deserved it. The janitor had cleaned house. And this time, the future belonged to the people who truly deserved it. Thomas had started as an observer, blending into the background, watching the cracks in his own company grow. But in the end, he did more than just fire the corrupt. He built something stronger in its place, because true leadership isn't about titles or power, it's about character. And Thomas had proven that the real strength of a company isn't found in its boardrooms. It's in the people who work hard every single day. What do you think about this story? Do you believe companies should value people based on merit instead of status? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories that challenge the way we see success, leadership, and justice. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next one. Thanks for watching, and remember, real power isn't in the position, it's in the person.